It was a quiet evening in Bristol just after 8:00 p.m. when an ordinary night inside a family home turned into tragedy. Shouting echoed through the house, then came a sudden silence, followed by something far worse. At the top of the stairs stood a young child, watching in horror what no child should ever see. Downstairs, one person lay bleeding on the kitchen floor, while the other desperately tried to cover up what had just happened. This wasn't just another fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship poisoned by jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in murder, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. And in the end, only one person would survive to tell the story. Today, we're diving into the tragic case of Abigail White and Bradley Lewis, a story of love gone wrong, where every red flag was ignored until it was too late. Before we start, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for all notifications. Now let's get started. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England, but her early years were shaped less by innocence and more by chaos. Her father was violent, and she watched him abuse her mother repeatedly. When her parents divorced, any hope for stability vanished. Her mother soon moved in a new partner, but instead of safety, the cycle of abuse continued. When Abigail's mother gave birth to another child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail directly. Eventually, the truth came out, and Abigail was removed from the home and placed in foster care. But the scars were already deep. School became a battlefield. Abigail struggled to focus, lashed out at classmates, and reacted violently to the smallest disruption. Her anger came from a place of survival, a defense mechanism born of trauma. When she didn't get her way, she erupted. Her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a special school for children with severe behavioral issues. Living briefly with her grandmother didn't help. The older woman couldn't handle Abigail's volatility. By 13, Abigail was back with her biological father, an alcoholic unable to offer guidance. Therapy followed, but the darkness stayed. She turned to alcohol, then cocaine. Drugs dulled the pain she carried, but only temporarily. By 15, she had attempted suicide twice. That year, she entered her first serious relationship. For 7 months, she believed she had finally found love. But when it ended, she spiraled again, and the next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, Abigail entered a relationship with a 29-year-old man. The age gap raised eyebrows, but the relationship lasted nearly 2 years. When it ended, Abigail had just aged out of foster care and moved into social housing. It was small and modest, but for the first time she had a place that was truly hers. Not long after, she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other in school, but this time, their connection quickly deepened. Abigail was 19, Bradley only 17, and within months, their relationship moved at a pace neither of them seemed able to slow. Soon, Abigail was pregnant. Their first child was born not long after, and in the years that followed, 2 more children joined the family. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, while Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. On the surface, it looked like they were building the life many young families dream of: steady work, a home, and 3 beautiful children. Abigail stayed at home caring for them, while Bradley shouldered the responsibility of being the provider. But behind that picture of family life, cracks were already showing. Money was tight. Living on a single income while raising 3 children was a constant struggle. Abigail wanted to contribute, but traditional work felt out of reach. That's when she discovered the growing online world of adult content. Under the name Fake Barbie, she created an Onlyfans account. Her provocative photos and videos quickly found an audience, and for Abigail, it was more than just income. It was validation, attention, and a sense of power she had never felt before. Within her first year, she earned $50,000. Even when the money slowed, the steady stream of income gave her financial independence. But the money didn't heal the fractures in her relationship. If anything, it widened them. Bradley struggled with jealousy and insecurity over Abigail's online work, while Abigail demanded constant validation and control. Their arguments became a daily routine, filled with shouting, accusations, and threats. Breakups were frequent, but they always circled back to one another. Each reunion was short-lived before the cycle repeated. Their children, caught in the middle, grew up surrounded by chaos. Friends and family urged them to separate for good, warning that the volatility would only get worse. But neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed willing to take that final step. It was as if their lives had become locked in a destructive loop, one that neither love nor time could fix. By then, the relationship was less about love and more about survival. Two people unable to let go, even as they destroyed each other in the process. The date was March 25th, 2022. By evening, Bradley Lewis had already endured a long, turbulent day with Abigail. The couple had argued at the pub in full public view, her screaming, throwing drinks, even spitting at strangers who tried to intervene. Their 3 young children had been forced to watch, absorbing yet another violent display between their parents. When the group finally left around 8 p.m., a friend gave them a lift back to their home in Kingswood, Bristol. On that ride, Bradley uttered chilling words that would later haunt everyone who heard them. "I'm already dead." It wasn't said lightly. It wasn't a joke. It was the confession of a young man who knew what likely awaited him once the front door closed. He had lived through years of Abigail's uncontrollable rage, her knives, her threats, and this time he seemed to sense that there would be no escape. When they arrived home, the argument picked up where it had left off. Abigail blamed Bradley for the pub incident, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she had accused of assaulting her. She saw his silence not as shock or fear, but as betrayal. The shouting grew louder, filling the small family home until it reached a boiling point. At some stage, Abigail stormed into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned holding a knife. This was not the first time blades had been introduced into their fights. Bradley had already been stabbed by her twice before, once in the arm, once in the leg. He had scars to prove it, but this time was different. Fueled by alcohol, drugs, and raw fury, Abigail lunged at Bradley. With one violent thrust, she drove the knife deep into his chest. The blow pierced his heart. Upstairs, their 3-year-old son had been stirred by the noise. Drawn by the shouting, he crept to the top of the stairs. From there, he witnessed what no child should ever see, his father collapsing to the floor, bleeding, while his mother stood frozen in shock with the knife still in her hand. For a moment, the rage vanished, replaced by silence and horror. Bradley stumbled into the kitchen, collapsed onto the floor, and lay gasping, his life slipping away. But Abigail's next actions were not those of someone desperate to save him. Instead of dialing 999, she panicked. She grabbed cleaning supplies. She stuffed Bradley's blood-soaked shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor. She chose to erase the evidence rather than call for help. It was only when neighbor Laura rushed over, alarmed by the chaos, that someone finally attempted to save Bradley's life. She found Abigail barefoot, hysterical, with a bruise on her arm but no trace of blood because Abigail had already started cleaning it away. Bradley lay motionless on the floor, but Laura detected the faintest breath. She immediately began CPR, her hands pressing down on his chest, desperately trying to keep him alive. Her husband joined in minutes later, taking over compressions while Laura stayed on the phone with emergency services. But the situation was dire. The wound was so deep that little blood escaped. He was bleeding internally, his heart fatally damaged. At 8:48 p.m., paramedics arrived. Bradley was rushed to the hospital, but it was already too late. Despite hours of surgery, the doctors could not save him. Just 22 years old, Bradley Lewis, father, son, brother, and friend, was pronounced dead. And back at the house, the woman who had killed him was spinning a new story. Abigail told friends and police that Bradley had harmed himself, that he had grabbed the knife, that he had forced her hand. The story changed with every telling, but the truth had already been witnessed by the child who had seen it all. Mommy stabbed Daddy. The crime had unfolded in front of the smallest, most innocent witness of them all. When emergency responders arrived at Abigail White's home on the night of March 25, 2022, they were met with a chaotic scene. Bradley Lewis, only 22 years old, lay gravely wounded with stab injuries to his chest. Despite frantic efforts to save him, Bradley was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after. At first, neighbors and even some of Abigail's acquaintances struggled to grasp the reality. On social media, Abigail had been active only hours earlier, posting images of herself as the fake Barbie that her growing online following adored. Now, behind those curated photos and filters, stood a crime scene filled with blood, grief, and unanswered questions. Abigail was taken into custody that same night. In her initial statements to the police, she insisted that the stabbing had been an accident, that the confrontation had spiraled out of control, and she never intended to kill Bradley. Detectives, however, were immediately skeptical. The wound Bradley suffered was deep and precise. It didn't align with the image of a clumsy accident. Moreover, Abigail's history with Bradley, peppered with arguments and accusations, gave investigators reason to suspect there was more to the story than a split-second mistake. Within hours, detectives began building their timeline of the evening. They spoke to neighbors who reported hearing raised voices from the house earlier that night, loud arguments that had become a frequent occurrence. One neighbor described the sounds as screaming, slamming doors, and then sudden silence. Friends of both Abigail and Bradley were contacted. Many shared similar accounts. Theirs was a relationship that could swing from affectionate to explosive in a matter of minutes. Several of Bradley's friends revealed that he had confided in them about feeling trapped in the relationship. Others said he had been thinking of leaving but worried about how Abigail would react if he did. As investigators dug deeper, Abigail's social media presence became a crucial part of the narrative. Her fake Barbie persona projected a glamorous, confident lifestyle, but private messages painted a darker picture. In chats pulled from her phone, Abigail frequently expressed jealousy, insecurity, and anger toward Bradley. Screenshots recovered by police showed accusations of infidelity and desperate pleas for reassurance. The contrast was stark. While her followers saw only polished photos, the digital trail told a story of obsession and emotional turmoil. Prosecutors would later argue that this obsession was a driving force behind the fatal night. The knife used in the attack was quickly recovered from the scene. Forensic teams confirmed it bore Bradley's blood, and its placement in the kitchen contradicted Abigail's claim that the stabbing was entirely accidental. Investigators also examined the physical layout of the home to determine the trajectory of the wound and whether it matched her story. Early reports suggested that Bradley's fatal injury required significant force. This detail alone undercut Abigail's explanation and strengthened the case for intent, or at least reckless aggression. As questioning continued, Abigail's account began to shift. At first, she downplayed the altercation, then admitted there had been an argument. Later, she claimed she had lashed out in fear, suggesting Bradley had pushed or provoked her. But detectives noticed the inconsistencies. Each version seemed to be molded to fit new evidence as it emerged. To investigators, it became clear that Abigail was not simply a grieving girlfriend caught in a tragic accident. She was the primary suspect in a domestic homicide. News of Bradley's death spread quickly through Bristol. Friends, family, and members of the local community were stunned. Bradley was described as kind, dedicated to his children, and always willing to help those around him. A vigil was held in his honor, where loved ones shared stories of his warmth and generosity. At the same time, Abigail's notoriety as an online influencer drew national attention to the case. Tabloids and mainstream outlets alike covered the story, often focusing on the strange contrast between her Instagram persona and the violent crime she was accused of committing. The narrative became one of tragedy and irony. The woman who presented herself as a glamorous fake Barbie was now facing the harsh reality of a murder charge. Within days, police compiled a mountain of evidence, witness testimony, digital messages, forensic reports, and Abigail's own contradictory statements. Each piece strengthened the suspicion that Bradley's death was not an accident, but the result of escalating violence within a toxic relationship. By the time the case was handed over to prosecutors, the picture was chillingly clear. What began as a passionate relationship had descended into jealousy, control, and ultimately fatal violence. And for Abigail White, the investigation tightening around her meant there was no escaping accountability. In the early hours after Bradley Lewis was pronounced dead, Abigail White was formally arrested on suspicion of murder. She was transported from the hospital to the police station, still in shock, still wearing traces of Bradley's blood. Cameras captured her being escorted in handcuffs, an image that would soon be splashed across headlines nationwide. For detectives, the decision to charge Abigail was not taken lightly. They weighed her conflicting statements, the forensic evidence, and the accounts of neighbors and friends. Everything pointed toward a domestic dispute that had crossed a fatal line, and though Abigail claimed she had never intended to kill Bradley, the severity of the stab wound made that defense difficult to accept. During police questioning, Abigail broke down repeatedly. At times she sobbed uncontrollably, insisting she loved Bradley and would never deliberately harm him. At other times, her tone hardened. She shifted blame, claiming Bradley had been aggressive, that she had acted in self-defense. But investigators pressed on, noting that Bradley's injuries told a different story. The force behind the stab wound suggested not panic, but determination. This wasn't just a scratch, one officer later recalled. It was a strike aimed at the chest, a part of the body where you know you can do the most damage. Days later, prosecutors announced that Abigail White would be charged with murder. The news reverberated through Bristol. For Bradley's family, it was confirmation of the nightmare they already knew in their hearts. For Abigail's supporters online, it was a shocking turn. How could the fake Barbie, a woman they knew only through filtered selfies and playful videos, be accused of such a violent act? Her bail was denied. The courts deemed her a risk, not only to the community but also potentially to herself, given the public scrutiny and emotional collapse that followed. Abigail would remain in custody as she awaited trial. By the time Abigail White's trial opened in 2022 at Bristol Crown Court, the case had already become one of the most widely discussed domestic homicide trials in the UK that year. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, family members, curious onlookers, all there to witness the proceedings. The prosecution's case was straightforward, but powerful. They argued that Abigail had become increasingly possessive and volatile in her relationship with Bradley. They presented evidence of her jealous messages, her repeated accusations of infidelity, and her threats when Bradley suggested leaving. Most damning of all were the forensic reports. The single deep wound to Bradley's chest, delivered with significant force. Expert witnesses testified that such an injury could not be explained away as an accident or clumsy movement. It was, they argued, a deliberate action. Abigail's defense team painted a different picture. They described a relationship fraught with tension, yes, but one where Abigail was vulnerable and emotionally unstable rather than malicious. They emphasized her love for Bradley and suggested that the stabbing occurred in a moment of heated conflict, not premeditation. They leaned on her history of mental health struggles, her impulsive personality, and the intense pressures of maintaining her online persona. They argued that Abigail had lashed out recklessly, without considering the deadly consequences. It was, they insisted, manslaughter, not murder. The trial was deeply emotional. Bradley's parents took the stand, their voices breaking as they described their son as a devoted father and a loving friend. They recounted the horror of getting the call that he had been stabbed, the agony of seeing him lifeless in the hospital. Friends testified to Bradley's confessions of feeling trapped and controlled in his relationship with Abigail. Neighbors recalled hearing violent arguments echoing through the walls in the months leading up to his death. When it came time for Abigail to testify, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. She cried as she described her relationship with Bradley as intense, but passionate. She admitted to jealousy and insecurity, but denied any intent to kill. "I never meant for him to die," she told the jury through tears. "I loved him. I just lost control." After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury faced a difficult choice. Was Abigail White guilty of murder, or was she guilty of manslaughter? In the end, they sided with the prosecution's version of events. The evidence of the force used, combined with Abigail's volatile history, painted a picture of intent, or at least a reckless disregard for Bradley's life. The jury returned a guilty verdict. The judge addressed Abigail directly during sentencing. He described the crime as a tragic consequence of jealousy and rage. He acknowledged her emotional struggles, but emphasized the devastating impact of her actions on Bradley's family and children. Abigail White was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 18 years before eligibility for parole. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was delivered. Bradley's family wept openly, clutching one another. Abigail herself sobbed, her carefully crafted fake Barbie image forever shattered. The verdict made national headlines. For many, the story became a cautionary tale about the hidden darkness behind social media personas. For Bradley's loved ones, however, no headline or sentence could erase their grief. They had lost a son, a father, a brother, and no amount of justice could bring him back. In the days after sentencing, tributes to Bradley flooded social media. Friends posted photos and memories, ensuring his life would be remembered for more than the circumstances of his death. As for Abigail, she would spend the foreseeable future behind bars, her once flourishing online presence erased, replaced by the cold reality of a prison cell. For Bradley Lewis's family, the aftermath of his death was a lifelong sentence of grief. His parents described him as the heart of their family, a devoted father to his children, and a man who always tried to see the best in others. Losing him in such a violent, unexpected way was a wound that would never fully heal. His children, far too young to understand the complexities of what had happened, were left without their father. The image of their dad, once full of laughter and warmth, was replaced with silence, confusion, and the painful knowledge that he was gone forever. Loved ones often said the hardest part was knowing Bradley's life had been cut short not by a stranger, but by the woman he trusted most. For Abigail White, prison became her new reality. The glamour and attention of her fake Barbie persona vanished overnight. Where once she posted selfies and playful clips to thousands of followers, she now faced the quiet, monotonous life of incarceration. Behind bars, she struggled to reconcile the person she projected online with the woman now convicted of murder. Reports suggested she was isolated, grappling with the shame of her actions and the weight of her sentence. For someone who had thrived on external validation, the sudden absence of adoring comments and digital applause left a void impossible to fill. The case became a lens through which many began to examine the toxic blend of social media culture, emotional volatility, and domestic violence. Abigail's carefully curated image on Instagram had projected glamour and confidence, but behind that facade was turmoil, jealousy, and instability. For many, it served as a sobering reminder. What we see online rarely reflects the reality of someone's life. Beneath the filters and captions, real struggles can be hidden, sometimes with devastating consequences. Bradley's murder also reignited conversations about domestic abuse, this time with a spotlight on female-perpetrated violence. Too often, cases of domestic violence focus solely on male abusers. But this tragedy forced the public to acknowledge that abuse can occur in any direction, regardless of gender. Experts and advocates urged communities to take warning signs seriously: jealousy, controlling behavior, threats, and to understand that men too can be victims of domestic abuse. Bradley's death, they said, should push society to expand its awareness and resources for all victims. In the weeks following the trial, vigils were held in Bradley's memory. Friends and neighbors gathered with candles, sharing stories about his kindness and generosity. His family vowed to keep his memory alive, not just through remembrance, but also through raising awareness about the dangers of toxic relationships. Many in the Bristol community reflected on how tragedy can strike behind closed doors, even in seemingly ordinary families. "If it can happen here," one neighbor said, "it can happen anywhere. We need to look out for one another." For Bradley's loved ones, the pain would never fully subside. Birthdays, holidays, and milestones would pass with an empty chair at the table. Yet out of this pain came a collective call for change, a push to recognize the signs of abuse, to intervene earlier, and to challenge the false realities so often projected online. Abigail White's story became a grim reminder of how jealousy and control can escalate into violence. Bradley's story, on the other hand, became a testament to love lost too soon, and a rallying cry for those who seek to prevent such tragedies from happening again. The tragic story of Abigail White and Bradley Lewis is a chilling reminder of how love can turn into obsession and how unchecked emotions can destroy lives. This case forces us to look beyond the filters of social media and to take the signs of toxic relationships seriously, no matter the gender of the victim or the perpetrator. It is a story not just about one couple, but a lesson for all of us. Behind the curated posts, real lives hang in the balance, and sometimes, tragically, those lives are lost. Thanks for watching, friends. Please don't forget to hit the like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay notified. See you in the next one.